Doctors and nurses of Reddit who have delivered babies to mothers who clearly cheated on their husbands. What was that like? Story 1. We had a very sweet, blonde haired, blue eyed mom and dad, along with their entire extended family, in the room for a delivery one busy afternoon at work. Think aunts, uncles, cousins, grandma, and grandpa, too. But the baby is born, and as the doctor places her on the mom's chest, the first words out of her mouth are, "That's not my baby, that's not my baby." The baby in question, still attached to the umbilical cord, has beautiful dark curly black hair and dark skin. The nurse looks at her and tells her that this is definitely her baby because she's still attached to you. And she, not so quietly, tells the nurse there's no way. "I never slept with a black man. It's not mine." The father is standing there silent, not sure what to do. A long, awkward silence fills the room. We clean her and the baby up as cheerfully as we can. We see the extended family filter out of the room and the father leave to get a cigarette. About 10 minutes later, a tall black guy walks up to our front desk, asking how to get to the patient in question's room. Story 2. I was assisting at a cesarean when I was a junior doctor. The woman's dark-skinned partner had been in prison 9 months or so. I took the baby immediately upon delivery and announced cheerily, "It's a boy." Her first words were, "Is it black?" Luckily, the baby was a mocha color that could have gone either way, and I told her in a mildly confused manner, "It could be." Story 3. Paramedic here. Our crew delivered a full berth in the back of our wing. We have 2 paramedics in the back with the patient, a driver, and I'm working on the laptop listening to info they're telling me to add to the report. All of a sudden, it goes kind of quiet. I hear the mother let out a very loud, "Oh crap, it's not white." She was very white, but a few more seconds of silence, and the driver alarm, beeping light on the center console sent from a button in the back, was pressed 2 times quickly, generally meaning to turn around and get info for the report. I turned from the front passenger seat to see a very dark skin color baby. I'm guessing Cuban. I can't see the mother's face, but all I see is her shaking her head. She begins to worry, saying that her husband is beating us there at the hospital. He can't see this. I just continue the report, and I'm not sure what the problem is, but I guess we'll see when we get there. Flash forward to the ER. We stop outside the ambulance bay. I get out to open the doors, and I'm met by another very white, heavy-set guy in a uniform shirt, dress pants, and glasses. He asked me if his wife was in there, and she was in labor when he was coming home. Hospital policy dictates that we can't have random people that we can't confirm identity that close to the rig when opening doors for patient safety. Security is there quick. Holds him back a bit. We open the doors, roll the patient and her newborn out. He takes one look, sees the color of the baby, jaw drops, looks at her in despair, like 1,000-yard stare. Even security had a look, like, wow, that woman messed up, and this guy knows it now. Wife says, "Dave, I can explain every bit of this. I know it looks weird, but I can." We wheel her in, no sign of husband. Last I knew, the husband didn't check into the hospital as a visitor. I'm assuming he went home to pack his stuff. I'm obviously not going to defend the woman for cheating. I can only imagine how unsettling it must be to see your wife give birth to someone else's baby, especially when you just spent 9 months blindly supporting her through the pregnancy in expectation of becoming a father. But I do feel a little bit of sympathy for the new mother, who is presumably now faced with raising this child alone unexpectedly. And the worst part of stories like this is that the child will inevitably be affected by it too, despite having done nothing wrong and having absolutely no involvement in what happens. It's like being punished for even being born. Story 4. Okay, I'm a nurse, but this isn't a story about a birth I witnessed. It was my own birth. And although my mother definitely didn't cheat, all the midwives were convinced she had. And yet, it'll be buried, but I think it's a funny story, so I'm going to share. For background, my mother, J, is white and had gotten married to another white guy, D, actually forced to by my grandparents, who were horrified she was living in sin. Their relationship petered out, and they separated, but remained very good friends. Then she met my father, A black man, and began a relationship with him. Mom was still married at the time. Neither her nor the husband were in a hurry to get divorced, and he became good friends with Mom's new partner, my dad. Mom felt pregnant with me. Time moves along, she goes into labor and needs to head up to the hospital. Dad was working and couldn't make it home in time to get her there. So, still being good friends with the husband, she rings him and he comes around to drive her to the hospital and decides to hang out until I'm born. After an hour or so, Dad arrives. He was freaking out a bit, so his best friend, H, also a black guy, drove because his dad didn't trust him. They arrive at the hospital right as Mom is ready to deliver. The midwives come out to the waiting room to grab the husband to be there when the baby is born. They knew that Mom's actual husband, D, had driven her there, so assumed that he was the father of the baby. Went and grabbed him and tried to drag him into the delivery room. He freaked out and yelled, "No, I'm not the father. I'm just the husband." The father is Aboriginal. Dad and H pull up in their car park as this is happening, and Dad leaps out of the car, decides he needs to have a quick smoke to settle his nerves before he goes in. His best friend H doesn't smoke cigarettes, but does smoke weed, and is pretty stoned, so he walks in ahead. Just then, the midwives come running back to the waiting room to grab the actual father, and see the only black guy in there, obviously him, right? So they take him and suit him up to bring him down to delivery. Being pretty stoned, H doesn't question this, and just goes along with it. The midwives reach the delivery room and shove him inside. Mom, legs in stirrups at the pushing stage, goes absolutely ballistic. "Not that black guy, he's not the father, go get the other one." The midwives hustle H out and return him to the waiting room to wait with D. My dad has come inside by now, and the midwives march up to him and said something like, "I hope you're the father this time, otherwise I'm going to just give up and she can give birth alone." So that's the story about how the hospital went through 3 different men before they finally got to my actual father. That would be a fantastic comedy sketch. Story 5. Paramedic here, had a mother give birth to a healthy baby in a home. Situational awareness had not helped me yet at this point. I asked if the father was here to cut the cord. We paramedics usually shy away from this duty because it opens us up to unwanted legal ramifications should something go wrong. There was a calm in the air after I asked the question and went on to do it myself. Come a few moments later, I was approached by another occupant of the home who informed me that this was a home for victims of physical assaults and that the father of the baby was indeed also the father of the mother and was currently incarcerated due to the aforementioned situation. It was an awkward ride to the hospital after that. Dang, this must have been awkward for her. It must be like rubbing salt in the wound. Story 6. Consulted a couple who were expecting a baby and were confused about how she had chlamydia again. Turns out they both had chlamydia. Both got treated and continued doing their thing. She could not get her head around how she had it again if he was the only guy she had slept with. He just looked very sheepish as I tried to subtly explain maybe he had caught it from elsewhere and passed it on. It took a long time for the penny to drop. One of those couples where you realize the kid won't get help with their science homework from their parents. I don't really understand the last line. People will often ignore the most obvious answer to a question if it means accepting something they don't want to believe. And believing the father of your child has been unfaithful is something a person obviously won't want to believe. Feels weird to end a story about a woman finding out in childbirth that she was cheated on with a jab at her intelligence. Is this OP supposed to be a doctor? Someone should tell them about the concept of bedside manner. One of those OPs where you realize their kids won't get help developing social skills from their parents. Story 7. So a friend of mine, he's unfortunately dead, had cancer and he was dating a girl for about 2 years. He then discovered he had cancer and that he would live, at best, 1 more year. His girlfriend announced to him a week later that she was pregnant. They were both white. He kept on saying that life is a joke. He was happy because he would have a baby now, but sad because he would die in a year. Anyway, 9 months later, the baby was born, and it was black. He then disappeared for weeks, and we learned that he had died a month later. Felt so freaking sorry. What a shame to die with that on your mind. Story 8. Had 2 women give birth a few days apart on my floor. Turns out they actually had the same baby daddy. The father of the 2 newborns got both patients pregnant around the same time. It was an interesting day for the social worker. Story 9. In high school, my gym teacher was married to the biology teacher, who was already really good friends with my math teacher. Always saw them chatting and walking together. Well, the bio teacher got pregnant, and when she brought the baby, there was an unignorable resemblance to the math teacher. Her husband ended up driving to the nearest hospital and shooting himself dead in the parking lot. It was a big scandal at our relatively small private school. One of a few, actually. Holy F, that escalated quickly. Did not see that coming. To the commenter who didn't see that coming, welcome to Reddit. You must not have been here long. It's a cesspool of lies, and I'm fairly certain this was one of them. Look, unless the gym and math teachers were different races, the baby didn't resemble either one of them. Have you ever seen a baby? They aren't known for their well-defined facial features. In fact, while I might not be remembering this with 100% accuracy, I'm pretty sure you can change the shape of a newborn's head just by bopping them on the soft spot hard enough. The idea that someone immediately thought he looked more like the math teacher and shot himself over it just doesn't read as being a totally honest story. But I do believe the OP went to private school. So did I. We tend to craft pretty elaborate lies. Actually, this OP's kind of amateur as it compared to most. Story 10. I know a guy who is fully white. His parents are both white, and his younger sister is black. I always assumed she was adopted. One day when I mentioned it, he looked at me weirdly and was like, "No, dude, that's my full-blood sister." Obviously, I didn't believe it, and apparently neither did his dad of the birth. But they got the paternity test, and she was his daughter. Likelihood is they've got some black ancestors far enough back to be forgotten about. I also know a dude who has a white Scottish mom and a black Jamaican dad. Dude came out pale white with a ginger afro. Genetics were not on his side. When you give birth to Napoleon Dynamite. Story 11. This isn't exactly what you're looking for, but my mom is black and my dad is white. My mom had kids with her first husband who was black, and they were born somewhat light-skinned, which is common among black children, so she was expecting this. But when she gave birth to my eldest full brother, she thought something was wrong because of how pale he was. Nurse said that happens, and he'll get color. Fast forward to when it's time for them to go home. The nurses that are now on duty refused to let her go because obviously there had been some sort of mix-up. She was literally accused of trying to steal a white baby, and even with my dad there apparently. This kid was still too white to be mixed race. This was the early 80s, so crazy stuff went down in hospitals. Mind you, we lived in an area where mixed-race families were non-existent at the time. Fast forward 16 years, and my brother has a mountain biking accident. He's literally hanging on by a thread. His friend calls, and my mom rushes over to the hospital. His friend is literally there saying, yes, this is his mom, and she has her ID. Bro didn't have it, though, and they're refusing to let her in. They ask for clarification if he's adopted or something, but apparently the truth was the wrong answer. The hospital security escorted her out, and she had to have my dad come, who, by the way, was just let right in. I highly doubt under any other circumstance they would not let a parent see their injured child because they don't look like them. But my mom being black with a very light-skinned child was apparently an issue. But anyway, back to the question. I wonder how many families have had drama thanks to genetics being so unpredictable. If my mom was white with a black husband, I'm certain everyone would think she cheated on my dad with a white guy. Heck, people even accused my mom of using an egg donor. Sometimes genes even skip generations, so a trait that hasn't popped up in a few generations can just randomly show up. That's the thing people like to forget, though. Let's face it, the most a lot of people will ever really learn about genetics is how to do it Punnett square. As I recall, we don't go much deeper into the topic when we're in school, and those can be useful for teaching how genotypes work in a pretty roundabout fashion, but it assumes all genes essentially operate on black and white, yes or no answers, and that's not quite accurate. Besides the issue of recessive genes, there's also a wider spectrum. So a Punnett square, which essentially categorizes genes into binary options represented by capital or lowercase letters, isn't going to have any bearing on a case like this. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 12. This lady at my church is a white female married to a white male. They have one younger kid who is the spitting image of his dad and obviously white. Then they have an older kid that is quite visibly mixed. The kid has dark brown skin and curly African-American hair and nonetheless looks nothing like the dad. So this lady claims that when she gave birth, the hospital gave her baby a shot that turned it black. Therefore, we refer to this kid as Black Shot. Feel bad for the kid, but he truly believes the story and is in like 7th grade. A new one for the anti-vaxxers to get behind. Story 13. I do have a story about a close call of this nature. So, a few years ago, I respond to an adult call of the weird nature. I was feeling adventurous about a request for a man to fulfill a cuckold fantasy. Basically, they wanted a man who looked similar to the boyfriend of the couple to F the girlfriend while the boyfriend watched. There was a whole act about it. She'd call me by his name, I'd act clearly different and have more libido than him. Let the lie slip up a few times and badly cover it up, but she'd buy it 100%. Make a whole act about it, like playing out a corn script. Anyway, the deed is done, and 9 months later, I get a call from the girlfriend. She's pregnant and expecting within a week, and the time frame meant I might be the father. I did use a condom, but she wasn't on the pill, and the paranoia was understandable. Also, they hadn't made love for a week before, and a couple weeks after, so the timing matched up. The baby came out. Either of us could be the father, as it looks vaguely like both of us. It was a boy, by the way. Naturally, it was freaking tense and awkward as heck. It took a week for the DNA test to get back. The delay was agonizing. Thankfully, it came back that I was in the clear. There was actually a bit of a celebration. When I got the word, I cheered. They hugged. I gave them a handshake and a hug, said my congratulations, went home and drank a whole dang bottle of Absolute vodka to celebrate. I don't know why, but I wanted this story to end with, and then we celebrated and I had round 2. Story 14. Anesthesiologist here. C-sections are typically done under spinal anesthesia, and we're the ones at the head of the table keeping the mother calm and talking her through the procedure while the surgeons operate. I've seen it more than once, but I remember one in particular when the parents were both very Caucasian and the baby was very much not. The actual father obviously had to be very dark-skinned. At delivery, when the not father saw the baby, he just looked down at his wife, who was starting to cry, and calmly said, "You effing horse," and walked out. She started screaming for him to come back, but there wasn't much he could do since she was, still being operated on. She lost it to the point I eventually had to sedate her just a bit because she was in danger of injuring herself. As far as I know, her husband never came back to the hospital. I don't know what happened after that. Baby was white on the ultrasound, so she thought she was in the clear. I actually had to look this up, but your average layperson can't tell race from an ultrasound. There are some differences in fetal growth between races, which makes sense. You can usually tell race by looking at a human skull, so it stands to reason there would be slight differences in the skull when it's developing. But have you seen an ultrasound? It's not the most stable image, and while 3D ultrasounds do appear in color, that's something added by the software. Just because the image is vaguely peachy doesn't mean that's the color of a baby. So if you don't want your husband or boyfriend immediately knowing that you cheated, I recommend sleeping with someone of the same race as him. As long as the other guy doesn't look like a math teacher, you can apparently tell that nonsense at a single glance. Story 15. A friend of mine tells the story of his aunt giving birth in the 1970s or 80s to a baby that at first glance appeared to be of Asian descent. Aunt and her husband are both Caucasian Midwesterners from long lines of the same sort going back to Germany. There was evidently a shock moment, and then the aunt's father, my friend's grandfather, quipped, "Well, they say 1 in 7 babies is born Chinese," and everyone laughed. The tension broke. Long enough for the doctor, also a white Midwesterner of German stock, said that likely the kid's color is just off due to the events of the birth. That baby is now a man in his 30s or 40s and looks like your typical Midwesterner. He just had some tinge to his skin for a few hours following the birth, plus some dark hair at birth that has since lightened up. Jaundice. Not a doctor, but if I remember correctly, it's due to the baby's immune system going haywire during birth. They put babies under a blue lamp for up to 24 hours to make it go away. Story 16. Bit reversed. I'm mixed from a very dark black man and a Mexican woman on the lighter side, barely passing. Well, my dad and mom didn't work out, but I was made. He ditched 2 weeks in and everything. She then got together with my stepdad about 2 months later. Longtime friends, and he knew she was pregnant. Break the news of being pregnant to the family. Everyone is excited, but no one knows it's not the super white man's child. So, cut to my birth, I come out clearly way too dark. Not charcoal, but something is missing on how. No one in the room knew but my mom, stepdad, and grandparents. I'm told it was a very awkward conversation. Skin color or not, my stepdad has always claimed me as blood, knowing full well I'm not, and I couldn't have lucked out harder. Having read quite a few Ask Reddit threads about cheating, I'm kind of happy to see how many stories in this particular thread were false alarms. This one's especially wholesome because it involves a man who technically had no obligation to the child's, yet still chose to be a father. Being a parent isn't just something that happens to you, it's something you choose. Even if one man unfortunately made the wrong choice, it's relieving to hear that another was still willing to step up to the plate. Story 17. No idea what the doctors thought, but I had a phone call from the wife asking for my blood type while they were in the hospital the next day, and I ducked home. I'm A negative, the wife is O negative. Baby is A positive. I've done enough science to know where that's going. Have done DNA testing. I'm 100% the dad. Still not sure how to get more interesting science info about the myriad markers that apparently exist. Story 18. My brother had a surprise baby this way. He and a coworker had a one-night stand while she was broken up with her ex. She gets back with her ex, ends up pregnant. Flash forward to the delivery day, the day my brother sends me a picture of a random baby out of the blue and says, "I think I'm a dad." She's white, her boyfriend is black, my brother is white. Baby came out looking very, very white. I don't know how it went down in the hospital room, but I know they separated very soon after. My brother went to visit her in the hospital and asked her if she would let him take a paternity test. She agreed, and it came back positive a week later. And that's how I got my surprise nephew. Story 19. My son and I just had our first in January. He has brown hair and I'm blonde. When she arrived, the nurse exclaimed, "Wow, look at that red hair." We know it's a recessive gene, but it wasn't the very first thing we expected to hear. We looked at each other for a moment, and I said, in my drugged and exhausted post-labor stupor, "I swear she's yours." Was there a typo in this story, or did this OP just casually drop that she had a baby with her own son? Because that sounds like the subject of an entirely different Ask Reddit thread altogether. I actually don't quite know how to respond to this one. I'm just going to hope it's a typo and move right along as if there's nothing to see here, even though there may be quite a lot. There's an expression about stories that are above Reddit's pay grade, and this feels like one of them. Story 20. Little different twist. I'm Ukrainian. My great-grandfather was Crimean Tatar, who was mixed Turkish and Mongolian. My wife is Ukrainian and Italian. My first boy was blonde. My second was dark-haired, dark-skinned, and has the classic almond-shaped Asiatic eyes, Mongolian spot. Despite the fact that we know my family history, we ordered a test to make sure there was no separation at birth stuff. C-section. Yep, that's our boy. You would never know looking at us that the boy is genetically related to us, and we love him to pieces. My two boys have heavily hooded eyes, almond-shaped. They look like blonde, blue-eyed Asians. I've actually heard Asian people ask me if they're half Asian. They're not. My husband and I are both German and Norwegian descent, but their paternal great-grandpa had the same eyes, so it's definitely a family trait. Story 21. Not exactly cheating, but definitely an awkward situation. During my OB rotation in med school, I was caring for a patient with a very large family, the kind that all wanted to be part of the delivery process from beginning to end. They were having a baby girl, and the room was absolutely filled from wall to wall with pink presents, bassinets, blankets, clothing, embroidered quilts, you name it. Anyways, I deliver the baby, and I'm horrified, thinking there was some sort of mutation in the baby's cooch. After my initial shock, I realized it was simply a perfectly normal-looking baby dong and testicles. The "congrats, it's a boy" was met with shock instead of excitement initially, but then everyone was so happy after understanding that he was perfectly healthy. Apparently, even with good prenatal care, you can miss the male genitalia on ultrasound about 1% of the time. I can't help but wonder if this couple wasted any kind of money on a gender reveal party. Imagine if they were that family whose gender reveal burned down a forest, only to be surprised later that they'd gotten it wrong anyway. Smokey the Bear is out there somewhere, hanging his hat in shame that he failed his one job over this kind of nonsense. That poor bear. Story 22. When I was born, my mom legitimately thought I was black, since I came out mostly purplish. One heart problem, and a few days later, I was the palest baby in the world. My mom was confused, and my dad almost walked out. Story 23. Super awkward for everyone involved. The husband was only in the room for a bit, then left and didn't see him again. The fob, father of baby, showed up after the baby was born. I've also had where they didn't know whose baby it was, so both guys were present to see who they thought it was. Story 24. I'm of Irish descent, extremely pale, freckled, wavy dark hair, and darker green eyes. My husband is half Native American, half German, dark hair, and slightly wavy as well. My daughter came out with light brown curly hair and ever so slight strawberry blonde pieces mixed throughout. Curls for those, and the nurse goes, "Wow, where did you get that hair?" Knowing I had similar color as a baby and my mother was kinky curly hair, my husband, in a room full of nurses, goes, "I don't know, Jade, where did she get that hair?" I could have freaking killed him. That's actually pretty funny. I can only imagine childbirth is stressful, so it's nice when you can get a funny story out of it. And props to this husband for remembering details about what his wife looked like as a baby, instead of just jumping to conclusions. There were some pretty upsetting stories in this thread, and I was actually expecting far more of them. It's nice that we were able to go out on a good note. Drama can be fun, but I think we need stories like this one far more than we need yet another reason to be angry at the world. We have enough of those right now. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.